campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we bring you our fifth and final program in a series that has been entitled The Future of the United States, Will Orwell's 1984 Be Realized? On this particular program we wish to address in some detail the subtopic of that major topic, the communications revolution, political decisions to count down 1984. In order to accomplish that goal, I have a very special privilege on behalf of our staff to welcome to our program Mr. Nicholas Johnson, who is head of the National Citizens Communications Lobby. He has a most extraordinary background. He holds a BA degree and a law degree from the University of Texas in Austin. He also was able to serve as law clerk to the late Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black. Mr. Johnson was appointed administrator of the United States Maritime Administration by the late President Johnson in 1964. President Johnson also appointed our guest as Commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission for a 7-year term in 1966. Mr. Johnson is the author of 3 books entitled How to Talk Back to Your Television Set, 1970, Test Pattern for Living, 1972, and Broadcasting in America, 1973. He has also been a professor of law at a number of law schools, including Georgetown University. Mr. Johnson, we've had a very special series of programs, and we're certainly looking forward to this one and welcome you to our program.
Thank you, Tony. I think it's been an extraordinary week for you here, and I'm very pleased to be able to participate in it.
Thank you so much. I would also like to welcome to our panel to question our guest today, Richard Snyder, Lou Reed, and Steve Meyer. And I will invite the first question from Richard Snyder.
Mr. Johnson, for 4 days now, we've heard from various speakers on perhaps the dangers of the sophisticated technology that exists in the United States and elsewhere in the world. And I'm starting to get a feeling that there's a lot of really sophisticated technology just sitting out there idling, waiting for somebody to put this together. Communications technology, spying technology, all sorts of things. I mean, we really had some rumblings around here about technology. Can places like the Supreme Court protect the individual from this kind of technology? Or will even the highest court in the land gradually have to crumble under the weight of all this technology?
Well, I think that there are great limits to what a court can do to protect you, aren't there? I mean, for starters, you've got to know you've got a problem. And one of the problems with the new technology that you described, certainly in the area of spying, eavesdropping, wiretapping, that sort of thing, is the miniaturization is such that, I mean, this microphone that we have on our lapels is, you know, about 5% the size that one would have been some time ago, and smaller than that compared to the ones they had before that. And microphones that are much smaller than this exist. So that I think there's a kind of an internal momentum to communications technology that carries it beyond the capacity of anybody really to control or predict where it's going to go.
And the courts can only react to this. Someone has to be injured, and then they can react and make a decision. There's no way for the courts to step in, if I hear you correctly, and initiate a stop to this, a protective action before something happens.
Well, courts are by definition reactive in that sense, as you point out. It's the legislature to which we must look for initiating actions or protections of some kind, or perhaps the executive branch, the governor or the White House, rather really than to the court system.
Lou Reed.
Just what is the National Citizens Communications Lobby? I sense here that you have something that you're trying to either reform or to do, and what are you up to?
Well, the National Citizens Communications Lobby is one of those hundreds of groups in our society that made up of volunteers who are concerned about some problem. There are groups trying to save whales and the environment and trying to save Mother Earth from nuclear holocaust and so forth. The National Citizens Communications Lobby is concerned about the way in which the communication system works in this country. It is not ideological in the sense that we're trying to put more liberals on the air, more conservatives on the air, or that we're tied with a moral majority or opposed to them or anything of that sort. It's really more of an ACLU approach of let's keep the system open and protect the interests of citizens and users and ordinary voters and folk, and see to it that it works to our betterment rather than against our best interests. And we do this really because it is all volunteer, very small staff, almost no budget and so forth. We work mostly with coalitions of other groups, trade unions, churches, small business groups, whatever, where interests are allied on an issue, and try to use it to prevent the worst of the abuses that the FCC engages in, or the industry groups come to Congress and try to present, so that at least another point of view is presented to the Congress. And that's not to say that we're right and all the companies are wrong. It's just to say that we at least are coming from a different place. We're not just trying to maximize our profit. We're at least trying to come up with wise national policies.
Was there something in particular that instigated the formation of your group? I mean, you're saying that groups form to deal with the problem. And was there a particular problem that you saw that really was the organizing issue?
Well, there has been a problem for far back as we know with regard to broadcasting that now exists also with regard to the other technologies, and that is a desire on the part of those who own and operate the facilities to control them to serve their own purposes, to maximize profits, to minimize controversy, to censor to serve their own ends, to keep people out of the communication system who might be a challenge to them in some way. We don't think that serves the national interest. So but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily in favor of government regulation rather than marketplace forces. If you can devise a marketplace system that will, in fact, provide public protections, that probably would be preferable. The problem is that the FCC and the industry talk about marketplace regulation, but they're not really willing to practice it. They just want to talk about it and take away all the public's rights to challenge licenses and see the public file and file fairness complaints and so on. They want to take all that away. But they don't want to give us also the opportunity for any American citizen to put a radio station on the air, which is what you'd have to have a real marketplace system. So that's the fight that we were started off with over 10 years ago, and we're still at in one form or another. Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Steve Meyer.
Television perhaps is one of the most powerful educational or opinion influencing tools we have. I'd like to explore a little bit the notion of regulation of programming material, or how do we get the public interest represented in programming material. Let me pose a case to you. A couple of centuries ago, we established that E. coli was bad for your health, and we adopted as a matter of policy that you had to put chlorine in your water and drink clean water and that sort of thing because it was in the public interest. Everybody stayed healthy. We've also been able to establish that violence on television is not good, and it influences in a negative way people's behavior and their reaction to problems. The notion of a public mental health policy about violence in television is a tempting one. How do we change the incentives in television programming so that we provide disincentives for things which are not good for our minds or our children?
Well, I think your question contains the answer, that we need to restructure the incentive system, that what we are now incenting and encouraging on the part of commercial broadcasters is delivering the maximum audience to the advertiser. The business in which they are engaged has nothing to do with programming. It has to do with selling the audience to the advertiser at a cost per thousand, just like you sell cattle at a cost per hundredweight. And just like the cattle don't get any of the money, the audience doesn't get any money. And the audience doesn't pay any money at that moment for receiving the programming. They pay $15 billion a year, but they pay every time they buy a hairspray or a toothpaste or a can of oil or a new car or whatever. I figured one television program added $100 per car to the sticker price of automobiles. So it's not free TV, although the broadcasters will tell you that. But it doesn't have anything to do with programming. It's the business of delivering the audience to the advertisers. So one of the ways we can try to change that is by structuring new systems, like the distribution of videotapes or video discs, or pay cable, where you pay for each program you watch. Now, in a way, you may say, oh, just a minute, that's going to run up my bill. Well, but it'll also force you to think about it. And if it's not advertiser supported, you at least won't be paying that $100 extra on the sticker price of your car. And we will then begin to get a measure of what it is people really want to watch. And I think at that point, in fairness to the broadcasters, I think there is then much less pressure for any kind of regulatory control. In the way that I think you find, even from the moral majority and groups on the other side that criticize television programming, relatively less criticism of movies, feature films shown in theaters. And I've always suspected that part of the reason that there is less criticism is that when you go to a movie, you've got some idea of what you're walking in to see. You got up out of your house and went there specifically for that purpose. You paid money to do it. And it's not really being forced upon you. It is a matter of selection. And if it turns out to be the case that 1/3 of the videotapes sold involve hard or softcore pornography, so be it. That's the marketplace mechanism. You can't prevent that. But when you put programs on the air and they're sent out on 3 major stations, and those are licensed to serve the public interest, and the federal government selected that licensee, and the federal government will send to the federal penitentiary anybody who competes with that licensee on that frequency. You're now talking about a measure of government involvement. You're talking about a pervasiveness throughout our society that I think does give each of us a right to voice our opinion as to what we think this public institution is doing to our families and ourselves and our communities.
Your response about incentives, I think, is a good one. And for all of us who make a financial choice to buy videotape or buy television programs through cable TV, we have no excuse. But for the young people, up to the time when they start making their own financial decisions, seems to me we have a public responsibility to try to provide a healthy environment. We don't teach violence in the schools. All of us taxpayers are paying for schools, and we've chosen not to have that as one of the subject matters. In a way, we're also paying for public TV. We just turn on the switch. Yet we're getting a product that is put upon us because it buys eyeballs, as you say, rather than making any contribution to the mind power of the nation, and we need that.
Sure. I mean, we've got a lot of people coming into our living rooms and trying to change the values of our children, that if they'd show up outside in the front yard talking to our kids, my God, we'd call the cops. And yet we let them come into the living room, see? So I think you're right. I think people do have a different feeling about it, and I think it's appropriate that they have a different feeling about it.
I would like to pose a question along the same lines that Steve just did concerning our theme, and we're very interested in tying all these programs to that theme. And as you know, Mr. Johnson, from material that you got, that the whole question is dealing with technology, and as Orwell talked about in 1984, would technology be used in such a way through the state or whatever source that it might be through Big Brother to control people by controlling their behavior, and that comes through values. And one of our guests earlier this month on this program indicated that one's values obviously dictates one's behavior, and that television could be used to not only know what your values was and to play upon those values, but to actually change those values. Do you see, from your great wealth of experience in television through the work on LCC and heading this lobbyist group, that television could be used by, one might say, a certain sector of society or an elite that might have certain motives that would not be as democratic? I'm thinking in the political arena, or one could speak in social, economic, or whatever realm you wish. Is there a danger of television being used, as Dr. Rokeach indicated that it might be, and therefore create a society in which we would be less democratic, or we would be less free will in decision making?
Well, I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, I think that's the whole purpose of television. I think that's the purpose of television in every society. I think we've really got to realize that power today is no longer measured in terms of access to money or land or factories. I mean, when the rebels take over in some country, and you read about in the paper on an ongoing basis, they don't go take the bank. They don't go seize the farmland so they can feed the hungry people. You hear, the rebels today took the radio stations in the capital and were broadcasting, and it's at that point that the revolution's over. They're now in control. That's what the fight's about in Poland. Solidarity wanted 2 hours of prime time. I mean, nobody remembers that that's what got this thing started. They wanted to get on television and put their view out to the members of their union and the people of Poland. And the government said, no, you can't get on television. So what are they doing now? They're operating a station clandestinely around the country, moving it around on and off short periods of time, moving the location and whatnot. When terrorists take a plane or seize hostages or something, what do they want? Inevitably, they've got some statement that they want to have read on the air. The other day, one went out and at gunpoint walked into a radio station and demanded the disc jockey read something over the air. That's what we're talking about, is that kind of access to the airwaves. That's how power is measured. And you have to ask, in this society, as in any other society, who controls the mass media? In this society, it happens to be the Fortune 500. In the Soviet Union, it's the Politburo. I mean, it's somebody different in every country, but there's always somebody in charge, and those people control that society. It's true in small groups as well. You're an anthropologist. Aren't you? I think.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But if the father controls the conversation at the dinner table, and children should be seen and not heard, or the teacher controls the classroom and you raise your hand and get called on, or at the Democratic National Convention, the chairman decides who gets to talk. That person is in control of that situation. That's where the power resides. The person who controls the communication controls the power, whether you're talking about the family dinner table or the United States of America. And that's what we're fighting about all around the world, is who gets to be on TV. That's what it's all about. And once you recognize that, you see that of course that's going on in the United States. And of course large corporations don't want messages on television that attack their honesty and integrity and their great social contribution to America and how much fish love to swim around those offshore drilling rigs and so forth. I mean, of course they want to control our imagery. Of course they want to change our values. What else is advertising about? When I was a boy, I'm not proud of this because our respect for the gay community is something that's really come about in later years. And now we recognize that that's important. But when I was a boy, we were all very macho-oriented, and we never wanted to do anything that would look at all feminist. And so we never wanted to have any perfume on. And if you got near your mother and she gave you a kiss or something, you'd go bathe before you went out to play baseball. I mean, it was the only time you ever did want to bathe, They have taken that attitude on the part of American males and turned that thing around 180 degrees and now created a $1 to $2 billion a year male cosmetics industry. Now, if that's not a change of values, I don't know what is. And I'm not saying it's good or bad or I don't take any position on those issues. What I'm saying is that it's an example of taking something that was a deeply embedded psychological belief, a part of really an anthropological study of America and roles and so forth, and through television advertising changed that. And you can see example after example of that. And that's what the commercials are about. And that, therefore, is what the entire system is about, since it's driven by commercials.
Richard Snyder.
In light of what you've just said, what about the current challenge to the fairness doctrine? The idea that if one point of view is presented on television, then you must make time available to an opposing point of view. And as I understand it, that idea is now being challenged. Maybe we really don't need it.
I know, isn't that just outrageous? I mean, can you imagine coming out foursquare against fairness? I mean, that's how far we've gone. That's the chairman of the FCC, Mark Fowler. He's coming out opposed to being fair. I mean, that's deregulation in Reagan style. I forgive the political illusion. I'm sure there are other presidents who would support the view, but it happens to be the administration we've got in there now, and it happens to be deregulation fever is the epidemic of Washington. Yeah, the fairness doctrine, relatively simple thing. It requires, number one, that a station must deal with controversial issues. number one. They can't simply play records all the time and say, well, we don't deal with controversy, that's why we didn't put anybody on. They have to deal with controversy. Secondly, when they deal with controversy, they don't have to present the other point of view or give equal time to the other. They just have to present some range of views. They can't use the station as an instrument of propaganda. Time doesn't have to be equal. No given individual has a right to walk in the station and demand to be heard. I'm not now talking about equal time in political contests between candidates. I'm talking about the fairness doctrine that you raised with regard to issues. And most responsible broadcasters think it's fine. There's no problem. They've never had a fairness challenge, and they never will. I mean, you put a lot of information out, you're bound to have presented a range of points of view on issues. But they're opposed to that. Now, my answer to that is, there are alternatives to the fairness doctrine. I don't think that's the best of all possible worlds. But you can't simultaneously say, we're going to refuse to give access to people who want to come on and use our station. We're not going to have public service announcements or free speech messages for points of view that we don't agree to. We're not going to permit people to buy time on our station. And we're going to repeal the fairness doctrine. And nobody else can broadcast on our frequency or they go to the federal penitentiary. I mean, it's that package that's unacceptable. But you know, they're just they're hell-bent on repealing the fairness doctrine, and I would urge any of the viewers who are concerned about that to you know, write their members of the Senate and the House, their representatives in the House in Washington, and alert them that this is something they do care about. Politicians, you know, really over the long haul have the most to lose. They're caught in a bind because on the one hand, the broadcasting industry is without question the single most powerful group in the United States. All that other industries can do is leave the brown paper bag with the $50,000 in cash. But what the candidate then has to do with that $50,000 is give it to the local broadcaster to buy back some time. So what the broadcasters sell, they can also give for free. So they really get to call the shots in Washington like no other lobbying group without exception. And it's a very real bind that leaves the politicians in. But as a congressman said back in the 1920s when they were writing this law, you know, we let this power fall into the hands of a few monopolists, and woe be to those who may disagree with them. I mean, you're just going to be wiped out. And that's what's going to happen.
Lou Reed.
Well, more on politicians. You say that the name of the game is who gets on TV, and the president gets on TV a great deal. And we are assuming that he really is a great communicator because we are told this by everyone. Do you agree that he is, and do we really have to always have actors in order to elect politicians?
Well, I think it's inevitable that, I mean, the signs that it was coming were, as one former president would have put it, perfectly clear. The role of the media in the political process, you know, you're a candidate for the legislature here, and a distinguished one, I might.
Thank you very much for the plug. That was very helpful.
But Lou Reed is the name. That's right. I don't know when the election. No, but in order to run for, I ran for Congress, and you know, the bumper stickers you can really pay for out of your pocket. I mean, that's not a problem. You can blanket a congressional district with bumper stickers for a couple $100. The reason we have high costs of campaigning is because of buying that radio and TV time. That's like 90% of your budget. So to talk about doing something about big money in politics and not bother to talk about where 90% of it is going is really a little silly. Why is it we don't talk about that? I mean, this is one of the only nations on earth that permits people to buy television time in an effort to buy office. I mean, any civilized country, they make the time available free. Here's an industry that's earning 100% per year on depreciated capital, licensed to serve the public interest, granted a monopoly medallion value by the government, protected from competition under threat of criminal sanctions, and they will sell the time to the people of this country so we can conduct our governing business? I mean, it's outrageous.
It's buying votes.
Well, of course it's buying votes, you know, so that's and then once you get in office, you govern through television. And we've seen the role of the media increase to the point where that's virtually all a public official does. is think about the media and dealing with the media day by day. You know, where can I go to get on the evening news, and do I have to get there by 11 rather than by 2, and well, then can we cancel this lunch in order that I use so on. I mean, your whole day is built around how can you get on the evening news, how can you get in the paper, or if you're running for state legislature, how can you get in the county weeklies, and you carry a little Polaroid and you get a picture out in front of the newspaper. And so, I mean, that's the whole business, and that's the way. So it was inevitable. I remember a political fundraiser out in Los Angeles for a fellow that wanted to run for Senate. And great ideas, but he really didn't present himself very well at this little fundraiser. And there are a lot of actors and folks around. And one of them took the campaign manager aside and said, hey, you know, you really ought to spruce up his act. I mean, get him to stand up straight and look at you, so on. And the campaign manager said, yeah, we're trying to improve it. And she said, well, what are you trying to make him look like? What are you trying? Well, he said, really, what I'd like him to look like is Hal Holbrook when he played the senator. I mean, it's you know, life is imitating TV rather than TV imitating life. We want candidates who look like the candidates we saw when Robert Redford played the candidate, or you know, Hal Holbrook played the senator. That's what we try to build toward. And so I think it was inevitable that we would, by about 1980, elect a professional actor as President of the United States, and so we did.
Steve Meyer.
We've talked about some of these abuses of television. I alluded earlier to violence, and now we talk about the political arena. We have this tremendous tool. What ideas do you have on making it a more useful tool? What changes should we make that we can make in light of the ownership of the media to produce better results in the public interest?
Well, that really requires another half hour.
And we have
Steve,
60 seconds.
We've got 60 seconds. Can I give folks an address where they can write me if they want to pursue some of this, some of your audience?
Certainly.
It's simple. It's just Box 1876 in Iowa City, Iowa. 52244. 52244. I don't know if they got that, but see, they got. I'll answer Steve's question. Steve can write me a letter.
I'll write your letter. All right.
Right.
And I could also point out to them they could write to this program. We could send it to you also. Mr. Johnson, it's been a pleasure having you with us, and we're concluding a 5-week series, and it's been extremely informative to the panel and myself, and I'm hoping that the viewers would agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we bring to conclusion the 5 weeks on the future of the United States. Will Orwell's 1984 be realized? We really hope you've enjoyed those programs and that you will write to us here at North Idaho College in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and we'll correspond with anyone who does write and give us your viewpoints as to this issue. We're very interested in what you think. Next week we'll start a series on a new subject, and we hope you'll be with us at that time. Please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.